It wasn't long ago when horse and oxen power worked the farms of North America. Then steam power came along, turning the large threshing machines that harvested the prairie crops. Steam power was a revolution in agriculture, but it only lasted just a short time before the small gasoline-powered tractors began to dominate the farms of North America. The size and cost of the smaller tractors became a reality for many farmers, and before too long, the harness and collars of the great teams gathered dust in the barns of the early settlers and farmers. These early tractors came in varying colors, but the most vivid colors across the landscape was that of the orange Alice Chalmers tractor. And before too many years went by, Alice Chalmers became well known as the new power of agriculture. Through the early and mid-1900s, the popularity of the Alice Chalmers tractors excelled, with the Alice Chalmers all-crop combine harvesters becoming some of the most sought-after of all combine harvesters. The celebration of the Alice Chalmers name now relies on these enthusiasts of today, folk who collect and rebuild these fine machines to like new condition, with the bright orange shining on today's prairie landscape. It's a spectacle to behold these tractors of character gleaming in their new coats of color. The gathering of the orange is a special event for these enthusiasts, and for this year many of these followers gathered at the Fort Loraine Museum in Portage, PRAIRIE, Manitoba. The many examples of farming equipment that traveled this distance covered the whole variety of farm machinery that came under the name Alice Chalmers. Tractors of all sizes and ages, combine swathers, the first of the round balers, the rotor baler. The demonstrations went right the way through the many different examples of farm work, even to a working example of an Alice Chalmers potato harvester.
Sit here, Alex, sit here, whatever, if you like. Minutes of the last meeting, please, Mr. Secretary.
You can see the people that were here and those who are absent. Special guest was Nan Jones.
A show of this size requires a lot of thought and planning, and under the watchful eye of Gilbert Vost, this show was created, and the 3 days of demonstrations and events were organized into a spectacular show.
That's about 4 years ago that it was right here at this museum when Vic Edward was manager here that he and I first discussed the possibility of having a gathering of the orange here at the museum. And I said, it's a big job, Vic, and he said, doesn't matter, we'll tackle it, we'll come along and do it. And along with a group of about 15, even 20 other people who came on site almost immediately, we began planning for this gathering of the orange at the Fort Loraine Museum. Of course, there were first of all, the idea of just what would be included in the show, and then, of course, once that was done, then it was a matter of now making the accommodations for it. We must remember that this museum and this show was slightly different in that the Fort Loraine Museum had never done anything like this before. So indeed, there was a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, and a lot of venues to be put in place so that the show could be held here.
Although the actual gathering of the orange started on the Friday, for a handful of folk and their tractors, their journey to the gathering of the orange began on the previous Monday, as a group of nearly 30-some tractors headed out from Oaks, North Dakota, on the long journey northwards to Portage, PRAIRIE. After 2 days of traveling, and by Wednesday morning, the orange caravan of Alice tractors reached the Canadian border at Windy Gates. The Border Control Air Service had been alerted to something odd happening at the Windy Gates crossing, and so a careful eye stretched along the border line.
I talked to Gilbert Vost here and Nan Jones about 3-4 years ago. When I heard the show was going to be up at Portage, PRAIRIE, Manitoba, I thought that'd be a good place to drive my tractor to. the tractor that I'm driving, this is the third gathering of the orange that tractor's been driven to, and I bought it in the fall of '96 and kind of looking for a place to where I could drive it to, and when I heard about this show I thought this was a good place. But so the planning started about 3 years ago or a little more, and I didn't think I'd have this many, but we really got a good bunch. We started out at Oaks, North Dakota on Monday morning, 7 a.m. in the rain. We haven't had any rain since, but we've had a little wind, but it's been a real good trip. We have tractors here from about 8 or 9 states. The furthest one, I believe, in the caravan is from Gainesville, Florida. We have we have tractors with 2 seats on, man and wife on them. We have a tractor with a lady driving, and we have had very minor problem. I think the worst problem is one person run out of gas.
Hey, how are you?
Everything has been going real good. We've been right on schedule. We just got across the border here now at Windy Gates, Manitoba, and we plan to get up by Portage, PRAIRIE at a little school right out, or school right on the edge of town, Gainsborough School, or used to be a school, I guess. And we plan to be up there this evening by hopefully 6:30, 7 o'clock.
The procession began again on the final leg of their trip.
After customs, we traveled north. It happened to be a really nice day, the best day of the 3-day trip. And then we got into Gainesville at the school there. And that night we had a pork barbecue supper and had a lot of camaraderie right there at that time. And then the next morning we come on up here, the 8 or 10 miles, and it's cloudy, but it didn't rain. And we got down to downtown here, and the Royal Mounted Police gave us in, and which was really neat. They had their full dress uniforms on, and really nice. And we had some fun time at the town there, waiting to come on into the city hall area. And they put the cuffs on the handcuffs on the caravan leader, Jim Roney, and they had a good time there doing that. We all got our picture taken, either individually or together at that time. And then we come on in to town in front of City Hall there, and the mayor and the other dignitaries were there and give a little talk, which was really a really warm, welcome feeling for the caravanners here. We had felt like we were a part of the community, and just a fantastic welcome.
Like all shows of such worth, a grand opening was scheduled early on the first day of the show. The caravan of tractors from North Dakota completed their journey parading down Main Street, Portage, PRAIRIE, led by an RCMP cruiser. It was an overcast and cool day for mid-August, but everyone's spirits were high and hopeful of the days ahead.
Again, it's good to see you all here. It's especially good to see the people that came in on the caravan. 21 tractors came in on the caravan. Of course, you're free to walk along.
Gilbert Bust welcomed everyone, while other messages added to the tone of the opening ceremonies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
As an added feature, Nan Jones, a significant figure in the North American Alice Chalmers Association and owner of the Gathering of the Orange name, she was awarded an honorary citizenship of the city of Portage, PRAIRIE.
And the presentation of an honorary citizenship in the city of Portage, PRAIRIE. Then what I want to tell you is that you will have a privilege that very few people in Portage, PRAIRIE have, and that is you will not be expected to pay taxes.
Speeches completed and flags flying high, the caravan of tractors headed east to the Fort Loraine Museum on the east side of Portage, and as such the beginnings of the 3 days of this gathering began. The Fort Loraine Museum can be found just on the outskirts of Portage and commemorates a small part of the life of the early pioneers in this area.
The museum itself was founded in the 1960s and was made possible in large part by a older gentleman, Mr. Thompson, who had a large collection of artifacts of this area and time, and they were donated to the Fort Loraine Museum, and the municipality decided to set it up as a small museum typical of this area and in that time frame. We look forward to this event and have been planning for it for the last couple of years. They were a great outfit to work with. It was nice to see such nice crowds, and the comments that we received were all very good. The gathering of the Orange crowd that gathered here were all in excess of 5,000 people, which pleased us immensely, really.
Visitors from all around the globe came to celebrate this event, enjoying the many demonstrations and activities. A busload of British enthusiasts turned up at the show on the first day, plus many other people from across Canada, the US, and from other parts of the world.
Weed Farm Tours made a visit to this museum about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and said that they would try to get a tour going to this part of the country at the time of the gathering of the Orange. Fortunately, they were able to do that. They had a busload of 45 people here. There were 4 or 5 other groups, small groups, family groups, husbands and wives, that also came from England. There were people here from right across Canada and right across the United States. All in all, it was quite a cross-section of not only regional areas, but also of people from doctors to lawyers to professors to farmers, and of course to all the local people that were right here from Portage-la-Prairie.
The morning's activities mostly amounted to visiting with friends and owners, checking out the many displays and learning about the 3 days to follow. With the variety of equipment here at the show in Portage, it was hard to know where to begin, but a trip through the large Alice Chalmers Museum was a good place to start. This museum is possibly the largest Alice Chalmers museum in the world, created by one of the greatest Alice enthusiasts found anywhere.
After retiring from farming, I was looking, well, even before I retired from farming, I was looking for a hobby, and did start to reconstruct and restore Alice Chalmers equipment, but it was all sitting in the machine shed at home, where, yes, people could come and have a look, but I thought that it'd be nice to have this in a public museum so that the public could at any time come and see. And I talked to the Fort Loraine Museum, and we developed a plan to put up the buildings here and to start to fill them with Alice Chalmers equipment. And probably within 2 years of this show, the buildings will be full of Alice Chalmers memorabilia, artifacts, and farm machinery.
There was a unanimous appreciation for this Alice Chalmers Museum.
Well, it's just awesome. Like it's the most complete collection of Alice Chalmers you'd ever see. It's just terrific.
The showground was full with lines of tractors and other equipment. Although this was not to be the largest gathering of the Orange, it was probably the most complete, with every type of machine associated with the name of Alice Chalmers available here for the visitors at the show. Names such as Garscott, Rumley and Gleaner also became part of this event. Looking around the displays of Alice tractors, I came upon these early models from a time when Alice tractors were painted green.
In 1914, Alice Chalmers decided, because basically to diversify the Alice Chalmers manufacturing line, which was into almost everything except farm machinery, in 1914 they decided that farm machinery looked like a good way to expand, and they introduced their first Alice Chalmers agricultural tractor. This is a Model 1018 Alice Chalmers tractor, the very first tractor that Alice Chalmers introduced back in 1914, and it is a three-wheeled model. As you can see, it had a unique two-cylinder opposed engine in it. It is water-cooled. It had just one speed forward and one reverse. It had a notch gear drive on the back wheels as opposed to a chain drive like some of the tractors had in those days, but all in all, rather primitive as far as farm tractor is concerned. Shortly after, they introduced the 612 tractor. This was a two-wheeled tractor that was made to be used like a team of horses. You would back it over the hitch of your dump rake, of your mower, of your binder, whatever it was, and hook it to the machine much like you would hitch up a team of horses. It also did have a little dolly that you could put behind so that you could ride it across the yard or pull a harrow. That was the second tractor. Both of them quite small tractors. Shortly after this, they introduced an 1830 tractor, which soon became a 2035 tractor. It was called the Model E, and then a Model L was introduced. It was slightly smaller, but looked exactly like the Model E with some different components. It was probably the least produced, the fewest produced was the Model L, and unfortunately I do not have one at this museum.
They ran from 1914 to 1928 as green tractors, and then orange in 1929.
What got them to change their colors, do you know?
They seen a few of the poppies which were orange, and they liked that color, so they decided to do the tractors in orange.
In these earlier years of the 1900s and before these lesser horsepower tractors were being sold to the average small farmer, the likes of the Rumley oil-pull tractors were gaining in popularity across the prairies, taking the place of the later steam engines.
Back in the early days of the agriculture tractor, horses were used for almost all, well, horses were used for all jobs, but of course the heavy jobs were the hardest on the horses. This basically was turning the threshing machine and plowing the land. And the first tractors were designed to be used for those two purposes, and most of the first tractors were used only and for that purpose. It wasn't until Alice Chalmers introduced the Model B in 1937 that now we had a little tractor that could replace a team of horses, was just as handy as a team of horses, and really cost only about the same as a team of horses in those days, and the horse was on its way out.
The Rumley Tractor Company was later to become part of the Alice Chalmers Corporation.
Well, Rumley was a very popular make of an engine. They were big into steam engines. The steam engine was replaced by these type of tractors eventually, and Rumley was an early pioneer in the internal combustion engine in a tractor. The Rumley product was considered at the time a very good tractor. This particular one right here is a 1912 Rumley Model E. They built the first Model E in 1910. They kept building them right till about 1924. Some improvements over the years, but basically the same tractor. You start them on gasoline. There's a 2-gallon tank for starting them on gasoline. You warm them up a little bit, and then you switch them over to kerosene. The Rumley was an early pioneer in burning low-grade fuels, especially kerosene, and they did that by developing a carburetor that would burn a low-grade fuel. Their carburetor was one of the best ones on a tractor at the time, and how they accomplished that feat was running their combustion temperature up quite high. They were able to do that by cooling the engine with oil instead of water. If they cooled it with water, it would boil. So what they did is they cooled with oil, got their temperature up high, and then they were able to burn the low-grade fuel, which, when this tractor was new, was about 8 cents a gallon. so it made very economical plowing or thrashing, and that's primarily what they used for. They could use them for anything, on a sawmill or anything, but basically they were used when they were new out here in the prairies of Canada to break land or thrash. At the time Rumley built this tractor, they were also producing steam engines. You had your choice in 1912 to buy a new Rumley steam engine or a kerosene burning tractor like this. Eventually, the Rumley tractor they quit building it. It was bought out by the Alice Chalmers company and became Rumley Alice. This style of tractor didn't last. The style of tractor really changed over the years. These big ones like this, they used in the early teens. They were, this was the style of tractor they built. But especially after the prairies were broken up, big tractors like this fell out of favor. Guys wanted smaller tractors. They wanted smaller thrashing machines so they could each own it. When these tractors were new, generally there was a lot of custom work being done, and every farmer didn't expect to own one. They were just too big and too expensive.
On the Friday morning, it was time to get set up for the afternoon's events. The 22-inch Alice Chalmers threshing machine was pulled from its home in the museum and taken out to the field to be made ready to be set up. As would be expected, some adjustments were needed to be made before everything was ready to go. This was the right place to find experienced mechanics who were able to help, and it wasn't too long before the belts were in place and tightened and the threshing machine was operational. A grain trailer was found and moved into place with the help of some of the spectators, and the unloading auger was adjusted to the right height. Things were taking shape. In the days before this show, 3 wagon loads of wheat sheaves had been cut and loaded and stored just in case wet weather prevented the binder from operating during the 3 days of the show. And so with the belts on the thresher and an old Alice tractor at the ready, the main drive belt turned and the separator came to life. Everything was ready for the afternoon's demonstration. The earliest of the threshing machines sold under the Alice Chalmers name were manufactured in the early 1900s. And although the Alice Chalmers threshing machine were not as numerous as the case models, they did make a reliable and sought-after thresher.
Alice Chalmers got into the thrashing machine business, of course, when they bought out the Advanced Rumley Thrashing Machine Company in LaPorte, Indiana. They wanted the factory really for other manufacturing, but along with it came the few oil pulls that were still left, the Rumley 6 and thrashing machines. For whatever reason, Rumley did not have a binder to binder the grain for their thrashing machines, but they did have a full line of thrashing machines. After Alice Chalmers took over, only 2 of these models. Well, there was a third one, which is a very, very rare, almost a prototype model that had all V-belts on the machine. But the 2 that were fairly popular were the one that's used here at the gathering of the Orange, Manitoba. It is a 2238, and the other one was a 2836. Those 2 models Alice Chalmers did sell with their own name on it after they purchased the Rumley company.
A favorite and much admired selection of equipment in the lineup was the old 1927 self-propelled Gleaner combine. This had been bought by Dave's father in a farm sale, and then they carefully restored it to its original condition.
I'll just cover a few of the features on this combine. It was made, of course, in 1927, but a lot of the features that are incorporated in this machine are still being used in Gleaner combines today. For instance, right here we have a grain blower for unloading the grain bin. This was a feature that was on this combine and on no other. They used it for a period of time and abandoned it. But it did work well, and they carried on. One feature that did stay, though, was the typical Gleaner return elevator. Comes all the way to the front and drops into the auger and takes the chaff and stuff back over to the other side and into the cylinder. It was necessary to do it that way because they have a front-mounted cylinder, and it would be inconvenient to get that grain into that cylinder any other way. The header, of course, is 7 foot, and it's a straight grain header. It does not have a pickup. They never did pick up with this machine. Oh boy, we're in business. Now we have here the cylinder is mounted right here behind the feeder. The grain comes off the head, goes back into here, and our cylinder is located right here. And it's a nice little cylinder here, and it's all run right off the engine. When you get up here, you see this tractor, a Ford tractor. It never had a PTO on it, so everything is taken off the belt pulley, and the chain comes up here and another one back here. This belt is driven almost direct from that PTO and drives the cylinder. Then the next feature we have here, we have the small front-mounted cylinder. We have the closed rub bar concave. Then we have a grain rattle that brings the grain from here all the way up here and dumps it on the shaker deck. And the next feature we have here is the double fan separating system, which is still used by Gleaner today. The front fan takes the air in and blows it up to about here, where the grain is coming off the rattle. When it drops onto the shoe, it's given a shot of air that takes the chaff that way. Then it gets onto the shoe, and the second fan takes over and gives it a nice blast from underneath, which makes a double air cleaning system, which is quite unique and a feature that Gleaner still has today. This machine doesn't have a conventional straw walker. It has a couple of little shafts here with little rug beaters on them, and that's what shakes the grain through. This is not commonly used anymore, but it is still available as an option on a Gleaner combine. And in certain types of crop, it does a fairly good job. They sold this particular unit mounted on this Fordson tractor. But if you happen to have a Fordson tractor of your own, Gleaner would sell you this combine package to be mounted on your tractor. They sold everything complete just the way it is, and you put it on your tractor. It apparently fitted other tractors. There was an Alice tractor and I think an International that were close enough to this that this package would fit. But this was an original, the way it came out here with this tractor on this combine.
One Tech 100, it was found over in the village. It was yours.
The demonstrations were a major part of this show, and although there were lines of the very finest and shiniest of this antique equipment, seeing these different displays of old-time farm work was a great crowd pleaser. The first demonstrations of the afternoon was the threshing demonstration.
Threshing machines, of course, were on their way out as soon as the combine came into vogue. Some of the companies held onto the threshing machine for some time, but Chalmers, the last year they sold threshing machines was in 1937. This was the end of the line. Their little all-crop harvester now had gained popularity. They were selling them by the thousands, and the threshing machine was a thing of the past.
Right after the grain was separated, the straw was baled. This was a real pleasure for everyone, as one of the first concepts of a round baler was demonstrated at the show. Back in the 1940s, Alice Chalmers sold a baler that made a unique small round bale of about 50 pounds.
The little round bale that has just been spoken of actually measured from 18 to 24 inches in diameter and only 36 inches wide. This concept, as has been mentioned, was introduced by Alice Chalmers in 47, but the concept was purchased from a farmer by the name of Ubal Lubin, who worked with that concept since the early part of the century. I think its first patent, or the first patent on the round bale, was taken out in 1906. He worked with it until 1940. He had worked with the concept and had indeed made some little round balers, a few, and one of them was used here at the gathering of the Orange Show as well. But Alice Chalmers purchased it in 1940, perfected it in the early 40s, could not produce it because of the limited supply of materials during the war, but in 1947 introduced the Alice Chalmers rotobaler, and over the next 30 years produced something like 75,000 of those little balers. Of course, the big round bale took over and the little bale became obsolete.
There were only a few people around at the show who had ever run one of these balers before. After a few bales were made, then things went a bit smoother.
There were a lot of different things about the little round baler, as it was known. The roto baler is the proper word for it. They were the lightest baler as far as weight is concerned on the market. They were the cheapest baler at the time on the market. They took less power than almost any other baler on the market. But the little round bale didn't gain favor with everybody. Some people liked the idea of cutting two strings and having it pop open and spread out for their cattle. With the round bale, the cattle had to do some chewing to get the hay, but the advantage was that they also didn't pop open on the wagon and waste a bale. There were some advantages, there were some disadvantages, and I think everybody will agree with that.
An interested crowd followed all of these demonstrations. Because of the recent rainfall, the first day didn't allow for any swathing or combining work, and so this meant there were no plows or cultivators working either. But the organizers decided it was worth the chance of trying out the potato harvester.
Our potato harvesting here has been a unique feature of this show because the Alice Chalmers potato harvester, although fairly popular in the 60s, hasn't been used since about 1980. When you're harvesting nowadays with a machine that old, you're bound to have some problems the first day, along with the wet conditions in the field. Yes, there were a few problems, but it went along much better yesterday. And if weather permitting, we'll just do the last few potatoes today. And we've had a successful run at using an Alice Chalmers potato harvester at a gathering of the Orange for the first time ever in demonstration.
After a few false starts, things began to work out better, and the harvester started to show off just how good a machine it really was.
The Alice Chalmers potato harvester, or all potato harvesters, sort of took over from where the potato diggers left off. The potato digger was simply a machine that dug the potatoes out of the ground, shook the dirt out of them, and then dropped them back on the ground, vines and all. And the first thing you had to do, of course, was pull the vines aside, then pick up the potatoes, put them into pails, then into bags, the bags onto the trailer, and the trailer or hay rack off to the yard. The potato harvester concept combined all these operations into one. The digger came along, the vines were carefully lifted off the top, the potatoes and dirt shook through the vines, and then fell onto the separating chain. The chain took them to the back where they went onto a cross conveyor and then forward on a sorting table. This is where people could pick out the remaining dirt or pick the remaining potatoes out of the dirt that was also being cast off on the one side. One of the advantages, or one of the new innovations on potato harvesters that was not available on the Alice Chalmers, was a vine chopper. This chopped the vines so that they became less of a problem behind the harvester. They also had dirt eliminators with rollers or shakers or wheels different ways of getting rid of some of the dirt. And eventually these were perfected to the point that we do not need any sorters on the harvesters at all in this day and age. Also, one of the later innovations on the potato harvesters were gigantic blowers. These blowers were blowing up from the bottom of the potatoes and eliminating any little bits of trash that were left in them. All these innovations on new harvesters that this one does not have, and yet, as you can see by the pictures in this tape, this did a satisfactory job of harvesting potatoes as long as you had some people to put on it to pick out the junk. Ellis Chalmers did not produce the harvester that was used here at the gathering of the orange in Manitoba. It was produced by Opal Manufacturing of Boise, Idaho. However, back in the early 60s, they were a very popular potato harvester in many areas, including the area right here at Portage, PRAIRIE. The harvester began production, I think Ellis Chalmers, the first year they sold them was in 1960. The Opal Manufacturing produced them for 7 or 8 years before that, but not with Ellis Chalmers colors. Ellis Chalmers sold them, I think, from 1960 on. This one is a 71. The machine worked well, but not well in all conditions. And for whatever reason, Opal Manufacturing seemed to fall behind in some of the refinements that were being put on potato harvesters. They were satisfied to leave this machine the way it was because it worked perfectly in their part of the country, in Idaho, and so they left it alone. The reason that we stopped using the machine that you saw here is because we moved from the single axle truck into tandem trucks. And the elevator on the machine was not long enough to load tandem trucks. And again, longer elevators were not available, so that we switched from the Ellis Chalmers machine to other makes.
Without a doubt, the most numerous class of Ellis Chalmers equipment on the site was the Ellis tractors. There were lines of these orange tractors, some looking their age and some with their fresh coats of paint. We've had a look at the earlier green models that took us up to the late 1920s, but it was the orange tractors that became such a major influence on the small farms of North America. There was a wide variety of these orange tractors at this show, with every model represented somewhere on the grounds. Arland and Marion have both been active members and enthusiasts of the Ellis Chalmers Association for many years. They proved to be a great help in telling the history of some of the notable tractors throughout the years.
Here we've got the early Model U tractor, came out in 1929. It did carry the orange color before the rest of them did in 1930. It was also built for the United Tractor Company for them to market. They would have carried the name United on the radiator rather than Ellis Chalmers. Continental engine in here up till serial number 7,000 and something, I believe, was the change when they went to the Ellis Chalmers engine, something like that. And the tractor actually was available on rubber, I believe, in 1932. And this is the early design. It did not have all the comforts of the later design U. You've got a clutch on the right, which is quite unusual. Don't have any operator platform here. Angle of the steering wheel is quite a bit different than the later ones. Yes, as you had noticed, some of our early tractors were green, in fact all of them, up till this Model U in 1929. That's the first one to carry the orange color, and by 1930 the entire line went to orange. Here we have the Model UC tractor. Early production of this was called the all-crop tractor. Came out in 1930, I believe. Used Continental engine, same as the early U had. And at that same serial number that I mentioned there on the U, about at that same time, then this went to the UM engine, Ellis Chalmers design. This is a 35 model here in front of us. That does have the Ellis Chalmers engine. It's a tricycle 3-plow tractor. Not the most comfortable tractor in the world, quite a serviceable tractor from all I've ever been told though. Big old horse. That's a basic U tractor that we talk about, came out in 1929. They put the final drives on them to lift them up for row crop use, and then went to a pedestal narrow front design up here. Okay, here we've got the model WC tractor. Come out in late 1933. The first approximately whatever it was, 29 or so of them came out with Waukesha engines. Alice Chalmers had the tractor ready to go, but they didn't quite have their 201-inch engine ready to go. So they had a good relationship with Waukesha and put the Waukesha engine in those first few.
Did they call this the Model W?
Yes.
First?
Actually, these early ones did not have the C on the model number. Glad you mentioned that there. And then I think approximately first the year of 34 is when they put the Alice Chalmers engine in them, and somewhere along in there I think I've got sales literature dated 34 that does call it WC then. Yes. Somewhere in there, yes. We had mentioned the Model U and the United tractor back in 1929, and right here we have the model that came out in 1936 when the U was altered considerably. You now had the Alice Chalmers engine in it, where the early ones had the Continental. We have quite a nice platform up here now for the operator. We have the clutch over on the left where they... Yeah, over on the left where they really should be, I think. And that was built on up till 42 when they stopped production because of the war effort. Then they got a contract with the government to build some to pull airplanes around at some of the airports, and when the war was over they had parts left over. They made arrangements with a few of the dealers up here in Canada that sold those U tractors quite often, if they wanted any of them, that they would put a few together. So back in about 47, 48, 49, 50, and 51, even the open radiator design like this was still being sold up here in Canada as a Wheatland tractor. These later Model U's was approximately 45 horse. They were never tested at Nebraska Test. Okay, here we've got the Model A tractor, introduced in 1936 and production ceased in 1942. This tractor retained the same basic engine as the 2035 and 2540 tractors. It's the Model E tractor is what we were talking about there. And then they actually used the differential transmission with some revamping of the Model U tractor that we talked about here earlier, and put this combination together and made quite a strong, powerful tractor out of it. This tractor came standard with a 6.5-inch stroke, 4 3/4-inch bore, but was available up to a 5 1/4-inch bore. Made quite a powerhouse, and if you put a little extra RPMs with them, there was almost no end to the horsepower you could bring out of this engine. Alice Chalmers had always had that large Model E tractor, and they just needed to get into a newer style transmission, where they only had the 2-speed yet on the 2540, which was built yet in 1935. Now you've got a more modern transmission and differential here. We should mention at this time Alice Chalmers was a leader in pioneering the rubber tires on farm tractors. And I believe it's 1932 when the first U was available from the factory with rubber tires. The WC, introduced in 33, as we mentioned earlier, was designed for rubber tires. It was available either way. But Alice Chalmers really pushed the rubber tire idea. It caught on fast, and it swept the industry without a doubt. We're looking here at a Model B tractor, introduced in late 1937, and again Alice had the tractor ready and didn't have their engine quite ready, so approximately the first 100 of these were built with Waukesha engines, and then about first of the year 38 they all had Alice Chalmers engines from then on. And in 1940 that tractor, basic tractor, was made available with a tricycle front and a wider rear tread to make it a full 2-row row crop tractor. This B, of course, had the narrow tread, actually designed to operate in one 40-inch row. We've got the little WF tractor here. This tractor starts out basically as a WC tractor. We have it built in more of a wheatland design. It's certainly got a shorter wheelbase by the way they turned the final drives. It's narrowed up considerably. And this is the unstyled model, which first came out in 1938. And then, if my memory serves correct, I believe the styled model of the WF came out in 1940 and produced till, I have a 1950 at home. I'm thinking that's getting towards the end, maybe could be 51. I can't remember that exactly, how long they produced them. They were not produced in huge numbers like the WC, but up in this area in Canada, I understand quite a few of them were sold. Okay, we're looking at a styled WC tractor here. Just right behind me, it'd be again an unstyled WC built from 33 till about spring of 1938. Then sometime in the summer of 38, we were available with the styled model, and starter and lights were standard on those tractors. That tractor then was built all the way up through early 1948. Of course, it gives you the covered radiator with the rounded design here compared to this earlier design. We was having trouble finding one of these, but this is the Model C tractor. It's essentially a B, but with the wider rear tread to make it a two-row tractor, row crop tractor. This one has the single front wheel, which is quite unusual. Most of them had two front wheels. Built from 1940 till CA 40 till about 1950. Yeah, that's about right. This is the Model CA, which replaced the C and was built then in the mid-50s for a while till we came to the D series. We do have a clutch that breaks the power to the right axle, so you have live power takeoff. 4-speed transmission against 3 on the B. In 1948, Alice Chalmers definitely needed to make some changes and update the tractor, get a hydraulic system on the thing. They made quite a few changes, yet the tractor appeared similar to the old style WC, and it did use the same basic engine, but we've got quite a different system with the brakes. We've now went to foot brakes. We got a different differential. Transmission wasn't altered that much yet. We've got the spin-out rear wheels, which was just a great idea. We've got all the system in place here now to use the mounted plow and other mounted implements. That all happened in 1948.
Came out with adjustable wide axle.
Yep. We had an adjustable wide front available on these, which on the WC, if you did get the wide front, it was not adjustable, and it was a very low clearance model. So quite a few changes. Oh, by the way, one that I really forgot, the live power takeoff. You had the auxiliary transmission clutch here where you could stop your forward motion and still keep your power takeoff running for combines or balers or such implements. A tremendous feature. That was an oil clutch. It was very difficult to damage that thing if you used any sense at all. I've heard of people slipping that thing almost all day in heavy fields of oats with a combine behind it, and didn't seem to bother it a bit. Okay, here we've got the WD-45. Became available in 1953. And essentially, we've got the basic WD tractor here, but we've got a half-inch longer stroke. Changed the displacement from 201 inch up to 226 inch. In most cases, we immediately came with a size larger tire when they made that change.
It's a helical gear transmission.
Yes, and definitely an improved transmission here, helical cut gears. They were quiet, they stood up well. We had the snap coupler system, gave you the quick hitching and unhitching of your mounted implements. Yes, got the 4-bolt front end here with the wide front, which was not available on the early 45s. This is a 1956 model. Here we've got a WD-45 diesel. I believe early in 55 they came out. We've got a 230 cubic inch Buda engine here. Alice Chalmers had purchased the Buda plant at that time. And of course, to accommodate the extra length of the engine, you'll notice how they had moved the radiator out to the end of the frame here. They were a very smooth running diesel engine, not a real high compression diesel. As they got age on them, some people had quite a few problems with them, but were certainly a nice engine to listen to and operated nice, and just everybody seems to like them. This one's equipped with the factory power steering. Maybe you had the shot, the little generator-driven hydraulic pump there for the power steering. The WD-45 was built in a all-fuel, in other words, a propane model. This is the WD-45 called the dual fuel model, which essentially is a propane tractor that can run on gasoline also. And this is a 55 model. They didn't make very many, something like 1,000 of these. And collectors just love to get a hold of them. Okay, we've got the little Model G tractor here. The first full year of production was 1948. They were built up through 55. And they use a little 4-cylinder Continental 62 cubic inch engine. Rear mounted. They were used for vegetable gardens and various other light duty jobs. They had a tremendous amount of equipment that was designed for them. A lot of the items mounted under here. Now this is not a factory item mounted here, but you could certainly use mid-mounted mowers on them. But there were cultivators and planters and mowers and just a lot of implements available for this G that quite often were hydraulic equipped. It was a very versatile little tractor. Ellis Chalmers came out in the spring of 1957 with a new series of tractors, the D series. The D14 was the first of them to be introduced. Tractor that was supposedly to replace the WD-45. Probably didn't quite do it, but that was the D14. Came out at that time. We're looking here at a D10, probably didn't come out till 1959. They were the narrow rear tread design, meant to replace the B. There's a D12 came out at the same time, meant to replace the CA. Again, the same basic design, those two, as far as engine, transmission, and things. But you had your different tread widths on the D10 and D12. And we mentioned the D14. Then in 1960, mid-year, D15 replaced the D14, a little more horsepower, just a little more tractor to do the job. Okay, we're still talking about D-series tractors. This is the model D17, came out in late 1957 and built till the spring of 67, about a 10-year run. The first model was only changed very minor up until 1961. We had a few grill changes. We had some black grills. We had several changes there. What we call a Series 2 tractor was built in 61 and 62. This one is a Series 2. They had the metal signs that said Ellis Chalmers on the side of the hood rather than decals. And then the grill was cream colored. Wheels, of course, were cream colored. In 63, we came out with a Series 3 D17. Then we had a reverse flow muffler to quiet them down a little more. A few other minor changes on that Series 3. And then probably the sweetheart of all of the D series is the one everybody loves, the Series 4 D17. Come out with that, I believe, sometime in 64. Built that till they ceased production and went to the 170, and that would have been in spring of 67. That had the constant running high volume, lower pressure hydraulic pump. Gave us a wonderful hydraulic system. You could get the tractor in either the snap coupler hitch or 3-point hitch, take your pick. Tractor that sells extremely well on the used market to this day. We don't see one right close here that we can show you, but there were 4 series of the D17. That D17 was certainly one of the most popular and best loved tractors that Ellis Chalmers ever built. Just going to mention this tractor here, the D17 Wheatland design, built somewhere like 59 and 60. Not a lot of these built. They were offered out here as the Western Special. Am I right, Marion? I believe that's what they were called. But big Wheatland fenders, as you can see. Did not use the 3-point hitch, just a standard drawbar. We do not have the power shift wheels as you normally saw on D-Series tractors. In other words, it's a Wheatland design, but still it's the D17. Yes, one thing we omitted on these D-Series tractors that was important, and that was the high-low design. You had your hand clutch over on the right that was neutral in the mid position, low side when you pulled it back toward you, and high side when you went ahead. That gave you, instead of a 4-speed transmission, immediately you had 8 speeds. That was on the D14, the D15, the D17, and the D19. D19 being, again, a considerably bigger tractor, bigger than Chalmers had ever been making. But that was put out in 1963 with the turbocharger. I know in our area, people thought that was quite a sizable tractor at that time. D21, I believe, first appeared in 1963. Again, much larger tractor than Alice had ever built. It was the first time they ever had over 100 horsepower standard. The early ones did not have the turbocharged diesel, and by about 1965, something like that, then they came with a turbocharged diesel. They were called Series 2 tractors, had 127, I believe, PTO horsepower. Okay, Chalmers made some major changes after the D series and came out with the 100 series. First one of them being a 190 tractor, approximately 70 horsepower. A little bit later they came with what was called the 190 XT. You came with a little bit bigger tire, and you ran up to, depending on whether you had gas, propane, or diesel, somewhere from 90 to 100 horsepower on those. Then you moved into the later 60s, and we came out with the 170 tractor in the fall of '67 that replaced that Series 4 D17. Somewhere in about '69, you came out with a 160 tractor, replaced the D15. And then pretty soon we came out with a 200 tractor to replace the 190. And then a little bit later, more horsepower with the 210, and here is a 220 tractor.
Which replaced 21.
Which, yes, did replace the 21, which we talked about earlier. So that was kind of how the lineup developed in the 100 series tractors. Now that takes us...
Front assist, they came with a...
Yep, this 220 was even available with a front wheel assist. Not a lot of those were made. Okay. We overlooked one of the 100 series tractors, the Model 440, built by Steiger in Fargo, North Dakota. And certainly a big horse with a Cummins engine here, and could do an awful lot of work with them. Chalmers came out with the 7000 series of tractors, I believe 1973. The first two that were introduced was a 7030 and a 7050. And it wasn't too long that was updated with a 7040 and a 7060. And a 7080. And then there were some other changes. The 7040 was changed to a 7045, a little more horsepower usually. We had a 7010, which replaced the 7000. We had a 7020. I believe we've mentioned about all those numbers.
Those replaced the 190 and the 200.
Yes, all those smaller numbered ones replaced 190s and 200s.
In the years as horsepower moved over to tractor power, it proved important for any machinery dealer to be able to take in the odd team of horses on trade for a new tractor. I've known Bill Young for about 10 years, and he told me a story just like that.
This tractor that we've got here now is the same tractor that my dad bought in 1939 when we were living out in the hills southwest of Moose Jaw. He had originally made a deal on a little Model B, which was, we thought, all we could afford. But before he got it delivered, they put a $200 discount on these because they were bringing in a newer model. So he traded off a couple of more horses and borrowed a little more money, and he bought this little a WF right exactly like this. Whenever people changed from horses to tractors, they had to utilize the horse machinery they had. So we took the tongues out of it and put a short short hitch on it and just continued on. But basically, this tractor replaced its 6-horse outfit. And the other thing was that the 6-horse outfit could only work so long. This thing could work as long as you could stand it. And consequently, you got a lot more work done. And of course, it was a novelty. I remember the controversy when we bought it. The whole country was on steel, and there was great noddings of heads that the rubber would never stand up and it would never get traction in the hills. And so Dad went ahead and bought it anyway. And I would guesstimate that within 2 years, everybody that had steel wheel tractors had either traded it off on a new one or else cut the rims and went on to rubber. And then it was also big enough to run a combine, so the next step was to buy a little 5-foot combine and make us totally independent of threshing crews and all that sort of stuff. But they were a good little tractor. They started in cold weather. We always had a lot of cattle, so there was chopping to do, and you know, in the winter time. And if you could turn them over, they would start. And they were tough. I mean, they were a slow-running tractor, and compared with some of the ones of the day, they were pretty competitive. And I guess that's where my affection for them started. Kind of gone from there. I am now in the process of developing a museum, and I've got a collection of about 15 or 20 of them, and of the various models up to about 1950, and that's what I want to do is depict the changing from horse farming to small tractor farming. And I think that particularly in our country out there, the Alice's took a biggest share of the market on the start out because they were very adaptable, and they just fit in well. They kind of got behind in later years because there was bigger tractors came out, but whenever the horses were changing, why they were the tractor that done the bill.
In the evening of the first day, a buffalo barbecue supper was served on the grounds of the museum, surrounded by the old homes and stores of the early 1900s, followed by some great entertainment. The music of the Inclinations pays tribute to the songs and life of Patsy Cline. On the Saturday, the second day of the show here, the sun came out, and after a dry night with no showers or rain, things looked good for the field demonstrations for the afternoon. There was a feeling of anticipation throughout the crowd as everyone prepared for the activities of the afternoon. It was a great day, a great crowd, and many different field displays were coming our way. On the Friday afternoon, the day before, I came across Arland, who was busy telling the story of the Alice Chalmers all-crop harvesters and their progress through the mid-1900s. As I had missed the beginning of his talk, he told me to meet with him on the Saturday morning, and he would run through the different models and their features. So that was my first job on the Saturday morning, to follow Arland through the varying different models of Alice Chalmers combines. But we'll wait until a little later in the program, when the combines are rolling, to learn more about these different models. On the first day of the show, the separator was powered by a recently restored Alice Chalmers tractor. On the second day, a smaller Rumley tractor was brought out for the job. There are only a few of these tractors left now, with their weight being of great appeal for the scrap metal dealers in the 1900s. Like many of the first tractors that became available, they each had their own way of starting. The Rumleys were different again.
Okay, what I'm going to be doing right here is adding a little bit of gas to it for starting it. So opening up a little needle valve at the carburetor. And now I'm just going to turn her over. She's in neutral. Self-starter's right here.
Started.
That's it. Just give her a little more gas. Shut off the gas, pour out some kerosene. When you first start off these tractors, you start them on gasoline. You got to get them warmed up, then you got to switch it over to kerosene. You can't start them on kerosene because, well, it's not quite as volatile as gasoline. But when you're working these old tractors, you got to add a little bit of water to the kerosene, otherwise it pre-ignites, creates a pinging noise, sound like somebody taking a hammer to the tractor. It just cools down the mixture and get a little more horsepower out of it. Well, if it's a cold day, say like 20 below, you may want to put a little bit of heat underneath the crankcase to get things all warmed up nicely, but you start her on the gas and you let her sit there and idle for a while. You may have to keep priming a little bit of gas into her. You got to get some heat up into it. Then after about 10-15 minutes, you should be able to start switching over to the kerosene. You can let her warm up real good. And that once she's warmed up, she's ready to go to work. All ready for a day's work.
A crowd was gathering across the field as the binders and swathers were starting to cut some of the grain crop. Many of the demonstrations that had been put on hold because of the damp conditions on the Friday now became a reality. Alice Chalmers never manufactured a binder of their own, and so a nicely rebuilt John Deere had been borrowed for the job during the 3 days.
No, I haven't been on a binder for over 50 years.
Okay. Did you used to be on it quite often?
I run a case binder with 4 horses and cut 130 acres with a 7-foot binder once when I was in my early teens. I was only about 14 at the time.
So heavy, yeah.
This crop of wheat was proving to be a challenge for the fellows running the binder.
Yeah, they never had fertilizer back then. They're a lot lighter crops.
When you clean the cow barn out or the pigs, then you got a bit of fertilizer. But
Yes, that's right. This crop is a real, very good wheat crop. All the wheat crop in the Portage area this year was great. This crop did not receive much fertilizer. We only thought that we put a little fertilizer on it to get it going well, and yet it yielded in the area of 55 bushels to the acre, perhaps even 60. We don't know. A lot of the wheat here yielded well over that this year. The binder used here, of course, is also having slight troubles with this big a crop. It is a competition binder. Alice Chalmers never did have a grain binder, and that is simply because Rumley never had a grain binder. Although they were big into thrashers, many thrashers, they did not have a grain binder and relied on other people's grain binders to binder the crops that their thrashing machines thresh.
well, we make a poor job of the sheaves because being as it's laying down, they go too far up on the table where the platform where the knotter is. And they won't get it close enough to the tops when it's too tangled, and when you get a short straw, it goes to the bottom, you get around the heads. And I've been trying to work it, but it doesn't quite work all the time. And I'm not as strong as I used to be. These levers work a little harder than they used to for some reason or other.
He's got more knowledgeable about it than I do, because I've never run one. All I did was towed one around when I was about 11, 12 years old. If the owner had been consented, we had to paint it orange. But I don't think he would appreciate that.
Although binders were never a part of the Alice Chalmers offering, Alice Chalmers did manufacture and sell a line of swathers. This fine-looking 16-foot swath was cut by a Kilbury swather that was sold under the name of Alice Chalmers.
In about 1947, maybe 1950, brothers in Winnipeg by the name of Kilbury invented a self-propelled swather. They produced that swather for several years, refined it, expanded into pull-type swathers, and in 1960, Alice Chalmers purchased a supply of pull-type swathers from Kilbury Industries. Kilbury Industries became known as MacDon. They're still producing combine headers, swathers, and other equipment today. One of the more successful stories of machine manufacturing in Manitoba. But Alice Chalmers did purchase and sell the Kilberry, later known MacDon swather, in two different sizes, 12 and 16 foot only, and in the pull type only. The other swather used here, one of the other swathers used here at the Gathering of the Orange, was a small little 6-foot swather. That swather was produced at the LaPorte plant where the little all-crop combines were used, and using quite a few of the components that were used on the combine as well. It was a short-lived duration. They were produced in the early 40s. One of the things was that they were fairly expensive as the swather was concerned, but the real reason that they were not very popular is that the farmers themselves had become very adept at taking old grain binders, throwing off the binder part of it, and using that old grain binder as a swather for their little all-crop combines. And so they didn't need to buy a swather. They made their own out of grain binders.
This was proving to be a great afternoon of demonstrations, and as the swathers continued with their task of cutting these acres of ripened wheat, the lineup of combines was making their way across the field, past the line of tractors, only to wait patiently that they're ready for their work to begin. A fair-sized area had been left unswathed for the straight-cut combines, with the swathed area ready for the combines with the pickup headers.
The difference between straight cutting and pickup combining was not so much geographical as a problem that you had with the crop itself. Straight cut hitting worked just fine, or straight cutting worked just fine, as long as the crop was nice and even, no difference in the height, and all ripened quite even. But quite often, especially in the colder climates, the crop would ripen uneven, so swathing was a benefit. And then, of course, there was the weed problem. If there were a lot of green weeds in it, the crop would not go through the combine very well while it was being straight cut. So swathing again was an advantage to dry the weeds before you thrash them. It would just be a matter of individual farmers who would make that choice, much more than geographical. Just the weeds in the crop and the kind of crop it was and how well it matured.
And so, as Gilbert mentioned, some areas of North America where the crop would ripen evenly, the straight-cut heads were most popular and have been available even for the earliest combines. In the more northern areas, where those seasons were not long enough to completely ripen the standing crop, the swather remained a popular addition to a harvesting team. Yes, the Saturday afternoon was coming alive. A new load of sheaves were loaded shortly after the binder had finished its work. With an extra load of sheaves, the separator demonstration was given a second go-around on the Saturday. This hugely enthusiastic crowd swarmed each and every fresh demonstration, eager to see the work of the past and these once-forgotten machines as they went about their tasks.
The demonstrations to me, the big part of the show, and they've had one after the other here, and we're looking forward to the combine demonstration today. They had the thrashing yesterday, and there's around the roto baler demonstration, I guess, and they had digging potatoes. I missed that one, but I think it's really a great show with the demonstrations they have here.
So with the swathing completed, it was now time for both the all-crop combines and the Gleaner combines to take to the field. It was fast and furious as all these models on display headed out into the field, either to pick up the freshly cut swath or to cut the standing crop with their straight cut heads, combining both the cutting and the threshing process.
Harry Merritt, being the manager of the farm equipment line back in the later 20s and 30s and into the 40s, saw the need for a small lightweight combine which would sell at a lower price so that most of farmers could afford to buy one for their individual farm. He bought a patent from a fellow by the name of Fleming out in California in 1931. That was a patent that give him the full width cylinder the same width as the cutting bar, along with a cylinder that used 750,000 bristles, or a sort of a wire brush cylinder. Well, they began working on that patent at the LaPorte, Indiana works. They had purchased that from Rumley in 1931, hoping to set up production there. They found out in testing that wire bristle thing gave some trouble. They would lose some of those wires and it would get into the feed, and cattle would swallow them, especially cows, and that's not a good thing. And so that had to be dropped. By 1934, they still were not ready for production. They hired a fellow then by the name of Charles Scranton to take over the engineering. He'd be head engineer. He in turn hired a young man named Bob Worrell right out of Purdue University. He took over the specific job of getting this thing ready for production. About 12 months later, mid-year in 35, they went into production with a combine like this. This is a 36 model, virtually no change from the 35. 1935, 1936, 1937, essentially these combines were the same. They had an unloading system that was not real successful. You had a clean grain elevator there that also served as the unloading elevator. It was not a good situation, but it would work. If you compare the competition at that time in the small combines, this was a superior machine. I don't think there's much doubt about it. They began to sell very well. One problem with this early model, if you'll notice up across the top, you see the return elevator and this device that shook and oscillated at a violent rate up here to try and separate the return material so that you dump the clean part of it out into the grain floor here and drop the returns into the cylinder. That did not work out very well, and by the first of the year 1937, Ellis Chalmers gave a kit to all the people that bought these early ones that would drop the return right into the cylinder like the later ones did and avoid all this mechanism up here which didn't want to stand up very well. 1938, Harry Merritt felt like he needed a smaller combine that sold for less money for the real small farmer. They had just come out with this little B tractor early that year, and late in 37, I guess, actually. And so they came with this 40-inch cut machine that would take one row of soybeans, and it sold for around $350. And they thought they could fill a market there that no one was attempting to take care of. Well, they did produce about 15,000 of these combines in late 1938, 1939, and 1940. But the sales of the 60 combine, which they were later named after that early model we had just looked at, 1938 they made changes. I'll show you that in a minute here. The sales of those were so superior to this that they finally ceased production. Okay, on this little 40 you had achieved the independent unloading system here. You have your clean grain elevator that delivers to the bin, and you have an unloading auger that lets you unload, and you can do the unloading without running the machine. The early model of the 5-foot wide machine built in 1935, 36, and 37. Then in 1938, major changes were made. We went to a flat top on the straw rack. We went to a separate clean grain elevator and an unloading system with an auger. The Model 60 combine, which was the largest production of all the numbers of combines, came out actually in 1938 and was built through 1948. And that had a separate unloading auger like this machine has, and a separate clean grain elevator. so that you had an independent system here and you could unload without having the machine in operation. Then in 1949 there was some changes made and it was called a 60A combine, and we again improved the unloading system by putting an auger in the bottom of the bin to get a total clean out of the bin, and a much improved engagement system here rather than a hub here that you turn to engage the clutch. We now have an over-centered dog clutch. Yes, the one thing we haven't mentioned on any of these models up to this point here, again we're talking about the 60A, they had the ground-driven reel, all of them did. And here we have the straw spreader option that came out in the later 30s. Pretty serviceable unit that would spread the straw quite well. Eventually, it appeared there was a need to widen the cut on this machine a little bit. So in 1953, they went to the model 66, added 6 inches of width to the cut. Not a lot of changes in the machine. Otherwise, the earlier 66 combine, in other words 1953 and 54 model, used that same unloading bin as the 60A I just shown you. That was an 18-bushel bin. In 1957, farms were beginning to get larger, and Chalmers felt the need for a larger pull-type combine. They introduced the Model 90 at that time. The basic design still similar to the older combines. We still have the rubber cylinder bars and rubber concaves, but yet we have a much larger straw rack than we ever had before. Yet, and another thing, they went to a narrower cylinder, just a 41-inch cylinder. It is larger in diameter than the earlier ones. We had a 7.5-foot cut now with an optional 2-foot extension that you could get to make it a 9.5-foot cut. This is the 7.5 here. That had, I believe, a 30-bushel bin. Again, the same detachable auger as we talked about on the 66. A different system of levers here to engage the separator and engage the unloading bin. And we had a swinging hitch also for transport position, which would bring the tractor over more to the center of the combine if you was out on the road. Those combines were built for 4 years, 57, 8, 9, and 60. Sales were not that great on that model, and they introduced the 72, which we're going to talk about next, in 1959. So by late 1960, they stopped production on this 90 combine. The total production of all the all-crop harvesters, starting from 1935 until the last one was produced in 1969, totaled about 375,000 units. It's a tremendous success story. During the later 30s and throughout the 40s and in the first half of the 50s, Chalmers sold more combines each year than all the other manufacturers put together. They became a very strong leader in the combine business. We've got the 72 combine here, the last one that was engineered in the all-crop series. Final production in 1969, first production 1959. Sold about 10,000 of these combines. Back in the late 50s, when Chalmers was still selling the number 66 combine that we looked at a little bit ago, and the larger one, the 90, management was pretty well decided that they were going to just drop the 66 and sell only the 90. Well, as they became closer to that point, the 90 wasn't selling as well as they had hoped. And a fellow by the name of Paul Harrer, who was chief engineer at the LaPorte Works at that time, convinced the top management people to put the new style head on the old basic machine here. Was all pretty much the same, 60, 66, and on through, and put a new head on there, and he thought we could still have a good serviceable machine and it wouldn't cost a lot in engineering to make those changes because they already had that style head on the 90. So they did and managed to sell about 10,000 of these, and they're certainly the sweetheart of the whole line of all-crop harvesters. Great capacity, smooth feeding. Of course, you had the hydraulics on the head as well as the 90 over here did. And you've got the 25-bushel bin that unloads from the tractor seat. They were just an awfully nice combine, and anybody that's ever run one will probably agree with that. In 1953, Alice Chalmers had been experimenting for several years with self-propelled combines, and they started production at that time on the Model 100, a 9-foot cut, and using the WD tractor engine. Just the first few, I think about 1,000 or so machines were built with that smaller engine, and then in '54 they came out with a WD-45 engine, which certainly helped. They needed some more horsepower. You stayed with the old design of the rubber shelling and rubber cylinder bars. You got a 48-inch cylinder here. I mentioned the cut of 9. You could get, I think it was a 2.5-foot extension, made it close to a 12-foot cut if you bought the extension. And you had a larger grain bin here, of course, than you'd ever had before. It was a strange-looking self-propelled combine with that cross-rise straw rack, but it was a serviceable unit. Then in 1958, they called them a Super 100 and made quite a few changes. They had retractable finger auger here in the head. Oh, they had a larger radiator and a taller air intake. The steering wheel was then set like in your car pickup on a slant. You had a much nicer gauge panel than you had on this one. Quite a few things were altered. They offered factory power steering and another thing, and quite a few things were changed on them last models of them.
The little Alice Chalmers 40 combine showed up many of the other combines with a very clean sample. What a great little combine.
Nice running little machine, did a very beautiful job. Grain sample is wonderful. Just like the rest of the all crops, it could be used to harvest over 100 different crops. Very nice little machine.
As this work of harvesting the wheat progressed through the afternoon, the decision was made to use the Rumley for ploughing rather than the old Scott steamer. Our rare dry day with its steady breeze had created some dangerous conditions for sparking off a fire in the stubble. So it was decided that they wouldn't use the steamer for the Saturday afternoon's ploughing demonstration. Fortunately though, with the Sunday being a damper day, we were all able to see the old Scott steamer of Bob Anderson's working away for everyone to enjoy. So as the Rumley and the plough started into their work, the crowd gathered to watch this great spectacle. These demonstrations were proving to be a great success for the Saturday afternoon.
Rumley began in his factory in LaPorte building steam engines. That was the big thing back in those days, and he built steam engines. Then he introduced threshing machines. Then he bought in, or there was amalgamation between the advanced threshing machine and the Rumley threshing machine, and that's why we have an advanced Rumley threshing machine. Rumleys came into, as soon as the steam engine was gone, Rumley was ready with their oil pull tractor, first introducing some mid-sized tractors, later the great big ones like you saw in Murray Johansson's big 3060 out here, and also the little Model K that you saw here. My own, which was on the threshing machine, is a 2035 Rumley. Mine is a 1926, and all of these Rumleys sort of phased out in about 1930 or 32, somewhere in there. And of course, in 1933 is when Alice Chalmers took over the Rumley factory to produce the little all-crop combine, and Rumley oil pulls were a thing of the past.
In order for the ploughing demonstration to continue on the Sunday, the freshly threshed straw had to be raked and baled and then cleared from the field. What better way to do this but with an old Alice Chalmers rotobaler? While the rotobaler was busy rolling up the straw, the old Alice tractor that had been powering the baler was beginning to need some tender loving care. Before too long, a toolbox appeared, the carburetor was cleaned, and with just a little effort, the engine powered up again, and in a few minutes they were back to work. During this afternoon, the old and very unique 1927 Gleaner combine had come out to the field to try its hand at combining some of the standing wheat. A valiant effort indeed, but the heavy crops grown nowadays and the small threshing capacity of this wonderful old combine, plus its fast ground speed, soon ended up showing a few difficulties.
This tractor we've got here has a very high low gear in it, and it's not really suitable for heavy crop like is out here. We can't go slow enough to be able to handle it. And what I was doing yesterday was taking half a cut, and we were going down there and letting people get pictures of it running, but we would have liked to put the thing right into it and let it work. But it doesn't want to do that because of the speed we have. So we're speculating, maybe, and one day we'll find out. Somebody will come along from Ford and they'll tell us exactly what we have, and we'll know what happened.
Problems aside, everyone loved this old harvester. And so the Saturday was coming to a close. It had truly been a great day with lots of interesting demonstrations and many firsts for the spectators at the show. Each morning began with a pancake breakfast at the museum. Sunday was no different, although the crowd was a little thinner on the ground. It was a damp morning, and it looked as though some of the fieldwork and demonstrations were going to have to be cancelled. But as the Sunday progressed, the forecasted rain for the morning didn't show up, and so we were able to continue as had originally been planned. An early morning church service was greeted by a good crowd, and some country gospel singing was led by Arland on the keyboard. On the Sunday morning, I came across a unique and interesting display in the main show tent. It was a display of Alice Chalmers' scaled toys, but the unique part of it was the heritage and history that went with this display. The proud owner and collector of these many items was a young fellow by the name of Mike Richter. I soon found out that he came by his interest in a very family way, following in the footsteps of his grandfather's Alice Chalmers dealership.
I started out collecting Alice Chalmers toys after my grandfather passed away. He was a dealer for 42 years in the hometown, and I just wanted something to remember him by, and so I started out with this 190 tractor here, and got from a friend, and started going to toy shows and picking up pieces here and there, and that was right about the time, later 80s, where the toy companies were starting to build a lot more Alice Chalmers toys. And so as they came out, I just started buying them a little here, a little there, and it got to the point where I needed a way to display them, so I decided to build a model of my grandfather's dealership, and so that goes over real well, and I got very detailed with that. I went right down to individual sales brochures and stuff, and so along the way I just like to pick up pieces and customize them, make them look real, and come up with other ideas. Just because we had the dealership, I got a few more ideas to do things, and so it just kind of turned into a giant snowball, if you might say, and I enjoy doing this. I enjoy meeting the people. I just have a blast doing this stuff, and it's just a good time. The camaraderie and the friendship, and I like the tractor shows because I get plenty of good pictures for research and stuff, and I go home and try to figure out how I can build that particular toy or something. So I just enjoy doing it. It's a lot of fun, and I enjoy meeting the people.
This was the third and final day of the show, which consumed nearly 4 years of planning. It had been a busy few days for the organizers of the event, and in particular for Gilbert Vast, the instigator of this show. At last I managed to find him as I wondered if he was happy with the proceedings so far.
Well, they're really quite well when you boils right down to the bottom of the whole barrel. We've been able to do our demonstrations. There's been good crowds. There's been great fun, and I've had nothing but compliments. Last night's banquet went very well. It was sold out full house. The only real disaster is that we had to cancel our plowing match altogether. Apart from that, Martin, it's been good.
It had been unfortunate that the plowing match had to have been cancelled, but we were heading into another great day of demonstrations ahead of us. On my way back across the field and through the lines of tractors and machinery, I came across one Rumley engine helping out another Rumley.
That engine belongs to the Austin Agricultural Museum. It hasn't run now for about 10 years. My son there, he kind of got it going this year up there, and a little balky this morning. We put the belt on to get it going, and hopefully in another year he'll have it in tip-top running order.
Once started, this old and unrestored engine took a drive around the field. Aha! A question answered. My father-in-law from England, who was also visiting the show, had posed the question to me of whether I knew any mechanical methods of picking these small round bales. Well, on the far side of the lines of machinery and in the stubble field that had been combined the day before, a wagon was working up and down the field picking these very bales. The rotor baler had made over 100 bales the evening before, and they needed to be cleared off the field before any plowing could be done. This was such a simple idea, and it worked really well. A more than adequate crew stacked the bales, and after the techniques of lining up the bales with the wheels of the picker had been mastered, this whole job was completed with very little fuss or bother.
Several different bale pickers or bale pickups, bale loaders, whichever term you wanted to use, were designed to be used for not only the square bale but the round bale as well. Chalmers had their own round bale loader that was not very successful or satisfactory for square bales. They worked pretty good for round bales, but the little bale loader that you see in the gathering of the orange video here is not an Chalmers. It was produced somewhere in Minnesota or Wisconsin. We're not even sure where it was manufactured, but it basically is a wheeled machine that pinches the bale, takes it up, and drops it off. This, of course, looks like a very unique and you might say simple machine, and I'm sure it is, and it could be used simply by pulling a pin and attaching it to a different wagon each time the wagon was full.
Among the lines of tractors on the field, I came across Jack, a fellow Portage resident and the proud owner of an Alice B tractor. On this very morning, Jack had relieved this old tractor of its for sale sign. After talking to Jack, I realized that the old bee had found a new home.
Well, I think it's a thing that is looking for a bit of love. I've got to do something about it to get it looking better for the next time. You fall in love with things, you know, and you don't know what way it'll work out. But I think it'll work out somehow.
It was great to have a steam engine here on site. We wanted a steam engine, and we were very happy that Bob Anderson volunteered to bring his steam engine down. Very happy to have that steam engine here. Bob Anderson is a retired farmer who lives only about 20 miles from here, has a large collection of equipment, including a Rumley threshing machine and various other pieces of equipment. Sure glad to see Bob here with his steam engine.
Well, the connection between the Gar-Scott and the Alice Chalmers is that the Rumley company bought Gar-Scott, the Gar-Scott company, about 1911 in the fall, and acquired that company and, of course, the machinery that went with it, and sold the inventory that they acquired with the purchase under the name of manufactured by Rumley. Well, then subsequently down the road, the Alice Chalmers bought Rumley, and so here we are today in the year 2004, and the connection is still there. It's my favorite engine because it was the one that I had all the fun building and all the difficulties and all the problems and all the rest of it, and so it means the most to me. It's a 25 horse, they call it. Written on the steam chest cover, it says 25 horse. And people think, well, that's horsepower, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I think what they meant in that era was that this engine would replace 25 horses on a farm. I think that's the thought behind that 25 horse. And that's about what it would do. It was just a size designation. Actual horsepower depends on your boiler pressure, and it could, no boiler pressure, no horsepower. And of course, at 150 pounds, it's got quite a bit of horsepower. So that's a relative thing. So I still think it's a 25 horse engine, which means 25 actual horses on a farm.
In the past 20 years or more, the use of the plough seems to have fallen out of favour. But as Bob told me, in the earlier days, ploughing was considered a worthy method of controlling quackgrass.
Well, of course, ploughing was the best way to control couch grass. We had couch grass in my part of the world, around in central Manitoba. The couch grass was always a problem, and if you plowed your summer fallow 3 times in the summer, they used to say you'd kill the couch grass. Well, I don't think we ever killed it. We may have controlled it. And John Deere, the man, has been given credit for developing the first actual steel plow that would scour and clean in the soil where he lived. And so it evolved from there, and of course the pioneers in Western Canada, the first implement they had to turn the soil was a plow. And it started out, I guess, with horses and oxen or vice versa. And then later years, when power came, like steam engines and then the big gas tractors, they went to multiple plows and broke the sod. And once they got the sod turned over, then they could harrow it and plant some grain and at least have something to live on. And when you talk about the bigger outfits, like I think of the books I've read, it talks about the Rouse Corporation out at Hanley or Kenniston in that area of Saskatchewan, between Regina and Saskatoon, that plowed with a 40-horse Reeves and probably a 20-bottom plow, or at least a 16, at the rate of 24 hours a day, and they would plow a quarter section a day or more. They had their crews that shift work so many hours each crew and plowed the clock around, and of course that was on a much bigger scale than we ever saw here in Manitoba, as far as I know.
Sunday afternoon proved to be a great day for the plough. Lots of acres to work and enough moisture and dampness to quell any fears of the stubble catching fire from a spark from the old Gar-Scott steamer. It was a crowd pleaser for sure, the smell of the damp and freshly turned soil, the clattering sound from both the steamer and the Rumley, all resulting in non-stop action and a great demonstration. This well-restored model had been found in very poor shape in a farmyard near Ely.
They were breaking land with it, and he told me the only thing he managed to break was the back wheel. So they got it repaired, took it to the yard, and it sat there for about 25 or 30 years, and I could see it from the highway every time I went by. I wondered what it was. I thought maybe it was a hard bar. One Sunday, wife and I were out driving, and I said, I'm going to go in and have a look and talk to him. So I went in. He said, oh, it belongs to my brother. It's just sitting in my yard. So we went to see him, and agreed. He woke up. He was sleeping Sunday afternoon snooze. Anyway, he said, oh yeah, I'll sell it to you. He's a scrap dealer wanted it, and I didn't want it to go there. So we made a deal on it. I took it home. It was pretty nearly a basket case. Cooler was broken off and the joints were broke. It was very badly seized. The sleeves were pitted, something unreal. I finally got them out, got the sleeve and the piston out. We took them apart. The last one we took apart, we had in a press, and we put as much pressure on it as we dare, and we hit it with a lead-filled pipe and a sledgehammer, and it finally broke loose and moved.
Along with Gilbert's fine and almost complete collection of Alice Chalmers, he is also the proud owner of a Rumley oil pull tractor. And with a little persuasion, Gilbert took the steering wheel, and at last, with the final day almost at an end, he too was able to join in, after spending 3 anxious days overseeing this show.
The Altons from Manitou, again about 45 miles southwest of here, have been a big help as far as restoring this Rumley machine is concerned. They have worked, both Alan, the father, and Scott, the son, have been working at the Austin Threshing reunion for years and years, and Alan went with me to look at this Rumley. When I purchased it, Alan and Scott have both been quite enthused about the work as it progressed, and Scott is here at the show getting it started for me, getting it lined up for me, and now it was my turn to run that Rumley as well, both on the threshing machine and on the plow.
One person we saw very little of throughout the 3 days of the show was Nan Jones. Her days were spent in the show tent, promoting her magazines and answering a whole world of questions. I asked her about her magazine.
Old Alice News started in 1983. Started out as a single sheet of paper with a heading to the effect like, we're here for you. It was going to be something just for Alice Chalmers people to exchange ideas, thoughts, maybe some restoration tips, maybe some classified ads looking for parts. I remember when I got up to like 286 subscriptions, and I thought, oh boy, if we can get to 300, this thing can pay its way at least, and I wasn't looking for any income at that point. It's continued to grow. We switched about 1995 into a magazine style format, style of paper. Then we went to the 4-color. We kind of done things in stages as we grew. We got to 300, which was a nice goal, and it just kept growing. It's still continuing to grow, and we're mailing well over 4,500 magazines, and that goes to the United States, Canada, and 10 foreign countries.
The ploughing continued on for most of the afternoon, and by the time the black clouds rolled in over Portage and the heavens opened, I know everyone felt very satisfied at having been at this great show, and their comments told the story of the 3 days at Portage.
I came today, and I really enjoyed it. I would have loved to seen this round baler work and how they picked it up. That's before my time, definitely.
I had a good time. Terrific. I've heard people say this is the best run show they've ever been at, so can't complain.
I think it's an event that Portage is going to remember for a long time. I think the Alice Chalmers people are going to remember it for a long time.
I've been to quite a number of gathering of the oranges, and this one tops it in my books because of the demonstrations that went on with the Alice and the Gleaner equipment.
Of course, having it gone by is a relief, and at the same time somewhat of a letdown because we've worked rather hard at this for 4 years, and now it's over.
It didn't matter who you spoke to. This gathering of the orange at the Fort Loraine Museum had been one of a kind. It had been the wealth of demonstrations that had caught the smiles of the thousands of visitors who had been here for the 3 days. A full line of harvesters, both Gleaners and Alice Chalmers, working in the field, the potato harvester demonstration, the binder, the swather, and the threshing show, plus the rotor baler and the plowing demonstrations, just to mention a few of the highlights of the show. What a great show!